Hello, and welcome to Infrastructure Modernization Solutions for Healthcare. My name is Jeanette Wider, and I'm Managing Editor of Healthcare Innovation. Innovations are at the heart of healthcare modernization. While not generating the glamour of clinical, surgical, and diagnostic advances, nor the appeal of telemedicine, major overhauls in IT infrastructure make each of the breakthroughs possible. Our next guests from DataCore Software, with headquarters right here in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, have been assisting medical centers, large and small, with their data storage renovations for over 2 decades. I'm pleased to speak with two of their technical principals, Brian and Augie. Why don't we begin by introducing yourself? Brian, would you like to go first?
Sure. Thanks, Jeanette. So I'm Brian Bashaw. I'm the field CTO here in the Americas for DataCore.
And I'm Augie Gonzalez. I'm part of the technical product marketing team out of Fort Lauderdale.
Great. Okay, so I'll just hop right into the questions, if that's okay with you two. So what are some of the obstacles you tackle when medical centers seek to upgrade their data storage equipment?
Yeah, there's several impediments that you run into, and unfortunately, they tend to narrow the choices for most of the decision makers. That puts them in a bind. They tend to come up with some hasty decisions that they soon regret. And part of they're bound by certain compatibility constraints. It makes it difficult for them to really consider some alternatives from competing suppliers. That tends to be at the heart of the issue, but it's compounded by the anticipation and the apprehension around outages that are necessary to swap out the gear. And unfortunately, with the rapid aging of IT hardware, anybody who's skipping one of those upgrade cycles, they quickly find themselves well behind the technology curves. So the DataCore's role in this picture is our storage virtualization software. It basically layers on top of these existing storage devices. And that way we insulate the applications, the users, and the administrators from the proprietary nuances of the underlying hardware. This enables them to shop around without hesitation, knowing that their operational procedures will apply equally well when they wheel in new technology, and they can quickly put it to use without planned downtime. So I've got a really good example is Maimonides Medical Center. They've taken full advantage of these non-disruptive upgrades and expansion over the past 18 years. So more than many of us have been with the same company. And certainly they have undertaken this with their PACS imaging system, their clinical programs, their human resources apps, never experiencing a glitch as they refreshed hardware and replaced major components of their storage environment. So that's saying quite a bit over that. During that period, they've moved through, that I know of, at least 5 substantial generations of storage area networks. And they also went through an entire site migration, which means they split their data center from one location. They went and grew it to another one and then created high availability between that. So they pulled that off without taking any planned or storage outage. They've also used that same technique on their research databases, and those are used for neonatal, pediatric, and geriatric care. So those are things that not only, they may not be as susceptible to or concerns about downtime, but they do need to be available when the folks are eager to run those models and the analysis that they do based on historicals and future projections. And so what they're looking for is not only the nonstop action, but low latency and very high throughput for this kind of advanced modeling. Maybe Brian might have a few things to add as well.
Yeah, apologize for the crackling of my water bottle there as well. Didn't mean to overstep. Yeah, I think, the other element to that too is just the reuse of hardware. I mean, Augie, you touched on it with this idea that, if you skip too many generations, then you just end up being left out with incompatible stacks. And we've even seen customers that have hardware that's still just fine. There's nothing wrong with it, can be still serviced, parts still readily available and available under warranty. But they're maybe just not participants in that ongoing structure anymore, that ongoing software stack anymore. And so we've actually had customers that have pulled these hardware environments into to a true software-defined storage play that allows this new hardware to have new life. I mean, thinking about a specific customer that we have right now, they had a system in place for a few years. They decided they were dissatisfied with the system itself, with the software services provided by that system. But, again, the hardware was still good. There was absolutely nothing wrong with it, and no need to send it off to a recycle bin or a landfill. Let's put our software stack on top of that and assimilate that into that environment and give it a new purpose. And in this case, the specific customer I'm thinking of uses this for an active archive for data sets that provide extended data sets for data lakes and search and transformation against as well. So nice little bit to pull in as customers are trying to deal with some of this growth that they're seeing.
Interesting.
There's also an economic side, Jeanette, which is that makes this whole process of modernization actually inviting. The part of the technique that we use is we separate the data services from the hardware on which it runs. And so that puts the buyers in the driver's seat when it comes to negotiating new upgrades. Usually what's been the case is that somebody buys into a certain vendor in the technology space. There tends to be a lock-in associated between the software and the hardware package that those are bundled into. And that shows itself when the 3 years or 2 years or the lease period is up. And what happens is that where that vendor may have been very eager to give you a discount to get you first in, they're less likely to be as generous on the next upgrade. They figure they have you over the barrel in it, so to speak, and are less willing to negotiate desirable terms. So by having this layer insulate between the data services and the hardware, it puts the buyers from the healthcare institutions with much more negotiating clout, because they're in a position where they could actually switch brands easily without disrupting, knowing they're not going to disrupt their operations folks, and they can pull this off at any time. And once your current supplier realizes that they are replaceable, they are much more likely to provide much favorable terms and conditions, because they obviously want to preserve their account. And if you've had a good relationship with that supplier, you really don't want to sever it over economic things. You'd really like to perpetuate it if possible. And so you get the best of both worlds. You get to get a better deal from them, and you get to keep that one manufacturer. And if they haven't done good by you, then by all means, start swapping out some of the gear and bringing in some new shiny objects into the picture from somebody else who is more eager for the business.
Interesting. Okay, so the next question I have for you two gentlemen is that large healthcare providers are gobbling up smaller facilities in basically every major city across the country, and they're struggling with standardizing their IT practices. How can DataCore help?
Yes, we're seeing that across the board. I see it down here. I was just visiting an uncle at Baptist Health, and I realized how much they've grown. And they've grown largely through acquisition of lots of other, what I used to call South Miami Hospital, and a few others like that. So I have firsthand experience with that situation. But as with your first question, the root of the cause of these troubles, it lies with incompatibilities between sites. So the moment they acquire somebody, they do through a merger and acquisition or whatever the process is that they became part of the broader healthcare family, there are certain preferences and vendors that each of these institutions used individually. And so the moment they come together, it's like, wait a minute, why'd you pick so-and-so versus a different supplier that we've chosen? They really don't have much choice in that. And we do assimilate these diverse equipment under a common data services platform. So it mutes the differences. Basically, now they can standardize on how they provision, how they protect and control their data storage resources in a very hardware independent fashion. And that makes it not only possible to pull that off through the M&A process, but in the due diligence cycle, you're actually able to consider candidates that in previous years you might have disregarded and said, hey, they're so far off in the choices they've made from what we made that we don't think that's ever going to gel. with DataCore, they can actually open up that consider and say, hey, there may be some of these smaller clinics that, yeah, they might have made some other different choices and they appear quite different, but DataCore is allowing us to make it all play well together. So that opens up new M&A possibilities not there in the past.
Yeah, I think the other element that comes with that is just this potential for incredibly diverse cloud strategies. It means something different to everyone that you ask. What it is their strategy is, what does cloud mean to them? Not just strategy for receiving content or providing services, but even carrying that forward to things like unifying disaster recovery and business continuance kind of conversations. And so a lot of those things start to come up, and a lot of the times what we see is people actually trying to bring that cloud-like experience back under their own umbrella. DataCore's actually in a privileged position to be used in the second largest hospital system in the world, and that's hosting data for the Army, the Navy, and the Air Force. There's about 75 or so hospitals, I think, in that organization, 450 plus clinics associated with that. Just shy of 9 million patients actually protected under that environment, working with partners that we have in the landscape like Lexmark. In that environment, we're providing a 16 petabyte unified storage solution to help provide a consistent point of view across all of those different endpoints as well.
Okay, so my next question is about long shipping delays and other supply chain issues with computer systems that have made it increasingly difficult to expand and refresh in time to meet growth and modernization objectives. Do you have any suggestions for our audience on this?
Yes, we do. And we're running into this every day. We're seeing it across the board, it's not just in the healthcare space, it's in any provisioning and acquisition of equipment, server equipment. It's also affecting us buying our cars, and everything else. Can't get the new car, but certainly those chips and other issues are creating problems, and also just all those container ships outside the ports are also aggravating the problem. But the first advice we give under these circumstances is really get better use of the equipment you already have in place. And you can do that by applying these state-of-the-art data services on top of them. So it's basically saying leverage the assets at your disposal. They're perfectly fine in many cases. They probably have a much longer life than you had originally anticipated based on financial models. And we do this by aggregating or pooling those resources that are currently isolated. So it's sometimes in the tech world, they call it silos, and we're basically creating a reservoir out of those silos. And in this way, you can have systems that appear to have filled up, and you normally would have had to go buy additional equipment. Instead, you can tap or borrow capacity from their neighbors, because now they are part of the same reservoir. And they usually have a little bit of excess storage. Somebody along the line's got extra stuff that they can contribute to the party. The second thing is you can take advantage of new devices that are in stock. So your wish list may have had A, B, and C gear in mind, but when you look around, the supplier might say, look, I don't have that one, but I have an equivalent model. It's a different brand. And I actually have quite a few of these because they haven't been as popular, but they're just as good. And I have them on the shelf. So you can defer that wait that you might have had otherwise. Rather than wait on those long lead times, you can get it now and possibly get it expedited to you. So that would be the very first thing I would suggest. And I'm sure Brian has a few things to add here.
Yeah, thanks, Augie. Yeah, I agree. I think there's this struggle with there's maybe certain components available, but are they the right components? Are they the ones that I can actually make use of and do so effectively, and more importantly, without putting our business at risk? And it's actually a thing in the data storage world where oftentimes the technology, the hardware technology, can outpace the ability to actually provide a durable experience when customers are looking to store, care, and feed for the data sets that they trust. And I know working in a couple of different environments in my past, there's a level of anxiety that comes with leveraging larger capacity storage media. Specifically, I think about working with hard disk drives, which, as much as we might want to say flash is going to kill the drive, we've been saying tape's dead for years and it's still here. So, I think there's going to always be a diverse set of storage media available and with their own special reasons for existence. But if we think about those hard drives in particular, one of the points of anxiety is just traditional protection of those drives, RAID-based protection, for example. It just doesn't typically scale very well, especially to larger capacity drives. And it does have a direct influence on data durability when it takes a long time to recover from those drives. And, with the vendors that we work with right now, having capacities in stock of 18 terabyte drives now, looking at things like, in the very near future, 60 terabytes, 100 terabytes and beyond, it's a real level of anxiety that comes with it. And it can directly be a part of that, how do I get my hands on hardware sort of question. And it's just one of those things that we also seek to address with our software-defined storage play. And it allows us to now actually embrace those new storage technologies and recover the data that might be hosted on them when drives fail, because if there's anything hard disk drives are born to do, it's one, store data, and two, fail at some point. It's just what they do. But when they do, the whole purpose of what we do from a data durability standpoint is to ensure that the storage system that we have provisioned performs equally well when something's broken as it does when it's all healthy. And we employ some pretty significant data protection methods in our system to help overcome and relieve this anxiety associated with that. I think all that aside, there's also, again, that cloud word that just keeps coming into play, and a lot of times, we've seen customers that have gone to that as a last resort, not necessarily in a negative way. I don't mean it that way, but as maybe they didn't really plan on going to cloud, but they had to get a service up and online and provide something to a consumer. And that is one of the benefits of public cloud providers is just that time to first service. It actually invites a new twist on a TCO conversation with customers. But that may not be part of the long-term plan. And I'm not going to tell you that you should have a foot in one or the other. That's not the purpose of today, but really just thinking about customers that may want to reinstantiate that service back on premises once that hardware does arrive. Having tool sets available that also allow customers to move freely from one to the other is something we believe in, and something we can provide today and allow people to very easily shift back and forth, place data where it needs to be, place that experience where it should be, and go on about their business.
Yeah, I think they can also use the cloud sometimes is used as in a pinch, basically, to address what you're doing, almost like a proof of concept before you've got a long delay on the acquisition side. So go ahead and stand up some instances on AWS or Azure, your cloud of choice, test the environment under those circumstances while you wait for the gear, and shore up any operational procedures and tuning that you might have to do ahead of that. So you get a leg up on that. By the time the gear arrives, you're in really solid shape. You don't have to worry about that. It's mostly just rolling in the physical hardware at that point.
Yep.
Good, really good points, Brian.
Cool.
Great. So my next question is, hardening the infrastructure against regional disasters and more mundane outages continues to worry those responsible for keeping hospital information systems up and running. What modernization techniques can you share with us to assist with business continuity and disaster avoidance?
Yeah, your point especially well taken down here in Hurricane Alley, Jeanette. We got the high winds and water intrusion wreaking havocs in our data center. Quite, it seems, what is it? Come June 1 through December 1st, I think is the current season. So that's half the year. But aside from the normal precautions that you use to shield the physical plant and the outer exterior, DataCore offers a comprehensive collection of integrated data replication solutions. And they span not only the intra-campus clusters that most people are running in their hospital practices, but also metropolitan areas and distant sites that are well out of harm's way. That's fundamental to any BCDR strategy. And the suite covers block, file, and object storage with equal ease. So that's going to be somewhere along the lines, one of those technologies will come into play, and we've got it covered. As importantly, kind of to back to what we were talking about earlier, equipment at each location can be markedly differently. So one need not have it standardized on a particular model or devices to back the other one up. What you have inside A, that's your primary data center, can be very different what you're running at your disaster recovery site, because the DataCore software is providing the homogeneity across them. And thinking back a little bit to your question on mergers and acquisitions and the globbing of different facilities, we found that some of the larger medical centers can actually engage in almost like a reciprocal disaster recovery arrangement with their new expanded facilities. They simply start replicating between each other. And then when a situation arises that some of the applications have to be failed over to the disaster recovery site, each of those makes some provisions for prioritizing how those server resources will be used. So not only did they gain additional patient community as a result of the acquisition, they've also increased or reduced their vulnerability to threats from environmental and all other kinds of things. We've also seen a different tactic taken by the smaller institutions. So they may not have been part of the M&A element, but they can certainly rely on co-location facilities that are situated basically in different fault zones to sidestep the regional disaster. So they're basically saying, I don't have somebody else, a companion company to work with or a companion institution to work with, but I do have these hire for rent, basically, locations. And these are arrangements that have been used, for example, during Superstorm Sandy. Some of these were used between Manhattan and across the Hudson River into New Jersey because they were on different floodplains. So when Manhattan was underwater, they were able to cut over using DataCore software to their storage systems at the co-location facility. And that kept them running throughout this dire emergency that they were experiencing. And so we can apply those same concepts here in beautiful South Florida, even on super rainy days.
Yeah, I share the Hurricane Alley experience. I'm just outside of Houston as well, and started my career planning disaster recovery and business continuance for storage in oil and gas environments. So, yeah, I've been through some fun stuff there as well. And I think, one of the things that I took away from my experience in that is that features are one thing. It's important to be able to get, of course, your data from one place to another and do so reliably and with some sort of predictability. But at the same time, it's also important to think about why you're doing these things. I recently had a conversation with somebody that was talking about, they back up to the cloud, and that's fantastic. If that meets your business objectives and it meets your recovery objectives, then awesome, go for it. But think about why. Think about, okay, fine, you're going to back up to a public cloud, or are you going to restore the public cloud, or are you going to restore back on-prem? If for your DR perspective, from a business continuance standpoint, if business continuance to you means that you're going to spin services up in the cloud and consume the data that you placed there in that disaster recovery strategy or that BC strategy, then again, fantastic. That's awesome. But think about those things. I was chatting with somebody very recently, asked them about this back at the cloud. And when we asked why and started asking what their recovery procedures looked like, it was interesting that the second level questions had just not really been addressed. And it really does kind of all start to touch on, how do we marry up this on-prem world with a public cloud world, and what makes the most sense for everything? I think there's a very real use case for placing data in a public cloud. I think there's very real use cases for consuming data in the public cloud. But I don't know that it needs to be the default answer. And that's where really, we start looking at not just our tool sets and the actual feature sets that we can provide, but there's enough people here inside of DataCore and then reaching out to our partner network, whether it's technology partners or resale partners alike, being able to tap into those levels of knowledge as well, around making sure that we help people put together a complete solution that's not just based around a feature set checkbox that I think a lot of people default to.
Yeah, I find that there's very superficial knowledge about what it takes to recover from the cloud and how to instantiate those applications there. And everybody looks at, well, it's just computer equipment. It looks just like a server, right? Until you understand, first of all, security behaviors and that a lot of closed down environments, the wide area access and the latencies they experience under those circumstances, and how do they route their community of users to the new location. And those haven't been thought through. It's just like, well, don't I just flip it just like I would inside the same cluster in the same location? It's nothing like that.
Right.
So definitely that expertise from subject matter experts is very desirable at the outset and throughout the entire planning process. And we can be here to help with that. Points.
So this wouldn't be a complete data-centric conversation if I didn't bring up ransomware. Obviously, it's an ever-growing challenge. You read the news every single day. There's a new ransomware attack. What can DataCore do to help protect customers against these malicious attacks?
Yeah, I'll jump in on that one, unless Augie, you want to?
No, you got it.
Okay, all right, excellent. I agree. I think ransomware. I giggle a tiny bit when we hear it anymore. It's the new AIML. If I can get through an entire call without saying those things, then it's a success. But it is all kidding aside, it's a real thing, and people are very concerned about it. And I think the challenge statement is that Augie and I were talking about this earlier. Actually, is people are they're looking for the easy button. I guess they're looking for that one-stop solution that says, you know what, with us, ransomware is not a problem. And we hear a lot of people boasting in that way, and I believe it's somewhat irresponsible. We can be a part of that complete solution. The ingredients that we provide, some of the feature sets we've talked about today, are elements of a solid ransomware protection scheme. Things like providing continuous data protection, or we have a tool or a feature we call life points that allow you to basically snapshot moments in time like you might be used to with a normal snapshot, but do so at specific data types or data life cycles as well. And get very granular to provide, very, very prescriptive protection, which is again, all fantastic. But we have to start tapping into other partners as well. And again, I'll look at, some of our technology partners. For example, Veeam recently released an update, and we've just announced our compatibility with this, and an ability to provide not only a durable storage container for backups, if that's part of your scheme, but also to do so with immutability, which is a new-ish feature that Veeam is offering now to ensure that those backup images are not ever manipulated once they've been committed to disk, or at least not manipulated until certain timers expire. That allow you now to have that unchangeable moment in time, or that unchangeable record that allows you a rollback point. But there's other things that come with that too. There's proper implementation and making sure that those backups are still durable once written. And that gets back into some of the care and feeding that we do on our side. But then all of that is moot if we don't have a good deployment scheme, a good consultative strategy around that. And so again, I'll reference our partners, our friends in the playground that are going to help us assemble these solutions for customers, because ultimately, if you're not also employing some kind of endpoint or perimeter-based security system to just avoid intrusion in the first place, then we're going to be able to help you get your data back, but we're not going to be able to necessarily prevent a ransomware attack that could have otherwise been diverted or averted. Augie?
No, I think you're spot on, Brian. It's exactly what I would highlight. Thank you.
Okay, well, we're almost out of time, but I wanted to see if either of you want to share anything else with our audience today before we wrap up.
I'd like to, for sure. One more thing. When you roll up the many dimensions really that we covered in the past few minutes, there's really one important takeaway. And as you look at DataCore, consider what we do to enable healthcare institutions to treat storage infrastructure as a dynamic rather than a static element. Because too many people look at it as like, we look at it as refreshes, modernizations on a 3-year window. And I think that's not healthy way to approach it, but more like, let's consider this as a self-paced upgrade. When I ever have budget and time to go pull it off, let's accomplish that, knowing that I can minimize the risk and mitigate the risk and the stress and the large capital expenses that normally technology refreshes technically bring. And that's how we accommodate the natural behavior of our clients. And at the same time, we make it practical for them to optimally use the resources they already have in place alongside the brand new gear. So you're not having, there's too many folks who are asking you to rip out perfectly good equipment before you can put in their hardware and then proceed to tie your hands going forward. And so with DataCore, you have that rare option to have both the current gear and the new stuff work together seamlessly and make those adjustments periodically and not wait for the big giant refreshes, which are so difficult on everybody, the organization and the individuals involved.
Brian, do you have anything to add before we wrap it up?
You know, I've been told I talk too much. I'm going to take advantage of this opportunity now to just say, no, I think that covers it well. Thanks.
Okay, so I want to thank you both, Brian and Augie, for being here today. I now have a much better understanding of the ways DataCore can accelerate storage infrastructure modernization for the healthcare community. Thanks again, guys.
Thank you much.
Thank you, Brian.